It is the Awesemo NFL Tournament Strategy Show. Greg Ehrenberg here, joined with our resident millionaire maker winner, Neil. For some reason, that always trips me up at the start of every single show. I always try to make it a point so that Neil once won $1 million over on DraftKings, and I try to really push that as a hook to the show, and it just never comes out of my mouth properly. But always want to give Neil his proper due because he always has good information. You guys should be following him on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. Today's show also sponsored by No House Advantage. Neil, we're about halfway through the football season. It's gone quick. How are you feeling about this slate?
It's a really interesting slate. I feel like we're missing some of the defenses that I usually like to target are not on the main slate. So we have a lot of low totals, which I feel like the ownership is pretty spread out at this point. So it's an interesting kind of a different slate than we've had the past couple of weeks, and no real like huge spreads. I think the biggest spread is like 10 or so. So nothing crazy like we've seen the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, there's no massive blowout lines. And let me just check, at least the last time I checked the totals, unless anything has changed this morning, there was not a single game, I believe, with a total over 50 points, which is also something that, pretty surprising considering some of the scoring that we've seen up across the NFL. Although, maybe consider then we've got teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, whose offense has been not nearly as prolific as has been the best. But actually, so we have the Rams-Titans game has a total over 50. But that game's not on the main slate. So yeah, no games on the main slate with a total over 50 points. We've got Baltimore, Minnesota with a total exactly 50. Chiefs, Packers, that game would have had a total over 50 if Aaron Rodgers was playing, but obviously that's not the case. We have Jordan Love at quarterback. And I think that's kind of an interesting talking point because we have Jordan Love on the slate with a very cheap price point, particularly on DraftKings. And how are you prioritizing getting him in lineups, if at all? Because I kind of think as a one-off, I've been experimenting with some lineups, and you could play Jordan Love at quarterback. You hope for 15 to 20 fantasy points. Don't even have to stack with anybody, and then you just pay up for whoever you want.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was going to say about Jordan Love. So he doesn't look incredible in the tools. In the boom bust tool, he is projected for a 6% ownership with only a 3.8% chance of being optimal, but a 6% boom score. So even there, and he's only 2.5% top stack odds. But at the same time, he's another one of those scenarios that we've talked about where we don't really know what to expect with Jordan Love. I feel like if he were in even a neutral matchup, I might just exclude him from my player pool, given how he's showing up in the boom bust tool. But in a matchup like this against the Chiefs, where it's such a bad defense, he should be able to put up some points. They're probably going to have to throw to keep up with the Chiefs. I'm going to have some Jordan Love. And I agree with you that we don't really need to pair him with anybody because typically with the Packers, and who knows if it's going to be the case with the backup quarterback, but usually he's going to be so concentrated to Davante Adams. And this is a scenario where the difference in the price is so great between Jordan Love and Davante Adams that Jordan Love could get there without Davante Adams getting there. And he could be optimal, I think, in this slate in particular, just because the totals are so low. He could put up 13 or 14 points and still be optimal, possibly. I mean, it'd be unlikely, but I think he has a chance to be. So yeah, I like the idea of having some Jordan Love without any stacking.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we have to consider too about some of the Packers wideouts, which in real out, we're just talking about Davante Adams for the most part. Like, how often are we going out of our way to look at other Packers pass catchers, unless it's a situation where somebody's out and there's obvious value somewhere. But like you said, so much of the Packers targets usually get concentrated to Davante Adams, and he still prices if Aaron Rodgers is going to be the quarterback. So we've got Davante Adams at 8,200, not to get too far ahead of ourselves by talking about the wideouts. But I think it's important that I still consider Jordan Love to be one of the better value plays on the slate because we're getting a starting quarterback at 4,400 and potentially playing a lot of garbage time. This could be a game that gets out of hand in the second half, and just Jordan Love is accumulating garbage time, fantasy points, via passing against prevent defense, maybe even running the football. So there are not too many often times that I'll look at a quarterback and say, like, I really want to play him naked, but I think Jordan Love is one of those scenarios today. But is there anybody else that you would look at as a pass catcher that you would really want to stack with Love, or just mostly looking at him with by himself?
I mean, I would have some stacks potentially with Davante Adams, just, hoping that he's just going to target his best receiver and hit him for 12 passes or something. I don't think I'd go too crazy with anybody. I mean, you could, because the Chiefs defense is so bad and because they should be passing, you could hope for the, one-off Allen Lazard to score a long touchdown or something, but it's not something that I'm going to be going out of my way to target. All
right, and then let's talk about the pay-up options at quarterback. We've got What are you doing with Kyler Murray? Actually, I guess we should start there. I've just kind of been assuming he's not playing, or if he does play, he's going to be limited enough to the point where he's not going to be running a lot. So I was looking more at, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen as pay up options. But do you have Kyler Murray in your player pool at the moment?
No, my expectation is that he's not going to play. And if we don't know going into the noon games whether Kyler Murray is going to play, I'm just going to plan on him being out because it seems so unlikely that he's going to play. And I'm going to target the 49ers defense a little bit in that scenario.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good point, is that if we do see him as questionable, I don't think people are going to be all over the 49ers defense. Right now people are very heavy on the Chiefs defense because of the Jordan Love situation and with Aaron Rodgers and also the Chiefs being really cheap. But yeah, I think that is a good shout out there with Kyler Murray. I'm also assuming he's out. I don't have interest in Colt McCoy this week, but 49ers defense would be interesting. But let's talk about those other pay up options. We've got Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. This is a slate with a decent amount of value to go to. How much are you prioritizing paying up a quarterback? And if so, which of those three is the top option for you?
For me, it's Lamar Jackson by a good margin, I'd say. He's projected for the most, or no, Josh Allen is actually projected for the most ownership. So Lamar Jackson, he's projected for 14.3% ownership, which, given that he's got a 22.6% chance of boom and an 18.7% optimal probability, I really like Lamar Jackson against the Vikings defense, which is kind of suspect. It's not a bad defense, but it's not a defense that really scares you. So I really like Lamar Jackson, the best of the three. After Lamar, I'll have some of all three of those guys. I like the idea of paying up more so in this side. I feel like the pay up options all look pretty good. Josh Allen, 15.6% projected ownership, 15.8% boom probability, only 11.6% optimal, but then 21.9% top stack odds. I always want to play Josh Allen some. I mean, he could rush in for a couple touchdowns against the Jaguars. He's got plenty of ways to get there. They're supposed to be putting up over 31 points in their implied team total. So yeah, I like Josh Allen quite a bit. And Patrick Mahomes is just mostly an ownership play because he's only projected for 5.8% ownership. And I've been saying all along, and I've been wrong like almost every week, I still think Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. He's not really doing it, but I still think that he's going to be, if not the best, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And at some point he's going to, get it together, and wouldn't shock me if it's this week against the Packers. So I'll definitely be over the field on Patrick Mahomes as well.
So I think there's a couple things going on with Patrick Mahomes. Number one, I do think he's playing a little bit worse this year than we've seen in previous years. To me, that is something that's going on. Number two, also, though, Travis Kelce looks, I'm not going to say washed, but he's not quite, I think, the same player he's been in previous years. And don't forget, this is a 32-year-old tight end. It's not crazy to think that Travis Kelce is just slightly less of a player now than he's been in previous years. And then you combine that with maybe a slight downtick in performance for Patrick Mahomes, and we're kind of getting a fantasy here that would not have otherwise been expected for Mahomes. But once again, that is a Chiefs stack that I think has massive amounts of upside, and people are generally off Mahomes. This is a situation where we had all these question marks with him, and he was going to be popular. I'd say, all right, let's go underweight to the field on him. But we have all these question marks on him, and as a result, people are just not stacking the Chiefs. They're not getting to Patrick Mahomes. So that is something that appeals to me when he's going to be low owned on both FanDuel and DraftKings. But let's move into the mid-range of quarterbacks. And the first guy I want to ask you about is Jalen Hurts, who once again rates out really well in the boom bust tool because of his massive fantasy point upside. This guy, for the most part, continues to suck for real life purposes. Although it's funny enough, last week he actually plays well against the Detroit Lions, and because he played well, it hurts his fantasy upside. We need him to be shitty in the first half and then have to play from behind the second half to really capture the fantasy upside. But in general, Jalen Hurts has been really good for fantasy, regardless of how he's played in real life. He scored over 20 fantasy points in all but one game now this season. So Jalen Hurts, I think, really gets slept on by the public just because they look at the real life results and not the fantasy results. We care more about the fantasy here. So I like Jalen Hurts. How about you?
Yeah, I love Jalen Hurts. He looks, like you said, great in the boom bust tool. He's only projected for 7.1% ownership. He doesn't look as great in the top stack odds. He's only 4.2% top stack. So which tells me maybe you want to play him naked. And I think that makes sense against the Chargers too. They have such a bad run defense. It's kind of a run funnel defense. And it wouldn't surprise me if Jalen Hurts puts up a lot of his points on the ground. So I like the idea of playing Hurts without any pass catchers in some of my lineups. I'll obviously be also pairing him some with Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith. But yeah, I like the idea of playing a lot of Hurts and running him naked in some of those lineups.
And then in terms of contrarian options, I'll open the floor to you in a second. But somebody who I do like for lower ownership is going to be Joe Burrow. And the reason has less to do with Burrow individually than some of these pass catchers in this game. So we have Joe Burrow, 2.7% chance to be optimal. That's not all that high. But Jarvis Landry is one of the overall most positively leveraged players on the slate. We also have T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, both who look like pretty strong options. There's also Tyler Boyd in the picture. So I think we could pretty easily go Joe Burrow with two of his wide receivers, run it back with Jarvis Landry. And that's a stack that I really like, even if Joe Burrow individually doesn't have the best leverage score. So do you like him? And are there any other lower owned QB options that you like this week?
Yeah, so Joe Burrow is not somebody that I have been that I listed on my list of quarterbacks that I wanted to talk about, but all three of his receivers are. So I think it makes some sense. I think what you're saying makes sense. Having stacking him with two, because he has those three and they're all so good. It wouldn't be that shocking to see them put up a lot of points and Joe Burrow being optimal, especially with the Landry run back. So it's not somebody that I've been targeting, but I don't hate the idea. I'm sure I'll have some Burrow just because I like the receiver so much.
Yeah, and but before I ask you about more of the contrarian options, the other thing too is I'm on the same page with you. Individually, I don't like Burrow all that much, but then you get to a point where I'm starting to build my lineups, and I care a lot more about position players than the individual quarterbacks. And it just gets to a point where if I'm rostering Jarvis Landry as one of my most rostered wide receivers this week, if I'm mixing in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd, I just kind of naturally get to Joe Burrow. And I think that if Joe Burrow has a crappy game this week, most of my lineups are probably going to suck anyway, because I'm really high on Jarvis Landry on the other side of the game and some of the Bengals pass catchers. So I kind of need him to play well anyway. So he kind of fits into my lineups from that perspective. But what other contrarian QBs are you looking at right now?
Yeah, so not extremely contrarian, but Tua is only projected for 2.8% ownership with a 13.9% boom probability. I like that. I mean, the Texans, and he's also nice leverage off of Myles Gaskin. It seems like Gaskin's going to be a little bit chalky. So I don't hate the idea of playing Tua, only 5,800. It wouldn't be that shocking if they put up their points through the air instead of on the ground. So I like the idea of playing some Tua. Derek Carr, I mean, everybody's going to be wanting to play Hunter Renfrow this week, or at least I would think so. Derek Carr is only projected for 5.3% ownership, though, with an 8.1% boom probability. So I'm going to be playing some Derek Carr. And also in that range, I'd say Daniel Jones looks pretty good. Daniel Jones, I feel like always looks good in the tools and often delivers. He's only projected for 4.6% ownership with an 11.1% boom probability. So I really like Daniel Jones against the Raiders. How do you feel about those three?
Yeah, Daniel Jones is somebody who I don't necessarily make him a priority for me, but I've probably been overweight to him just about every slate the Giants have been on this year. For one reason, it's easy to get overweight to him. There's only been, I think, 1 week where he picked up ownership that was north of like 5 or 6%. And like you said, he has upside. He has a lot of rushing ability. And something that we talked about way back at the beginning of the year is Daniel Jones always got made fun of for that play against the Eagles where he ran for 75 yards, then tripped and fell and didn't score a touchdown. But I always look at that play as, hey, how many quarterbacks are capable of 70-yard runs? And it's, even if he didn't score the touchdown, it's a funny meme. It's an overall good fantasy play, and it kind of shows the running ability he has. So, yeah, I think that for fantasy upside, he is more appeal than I think most people realize.
Yeah, I agree. And then the only other quarterback that I had listed is Mac Jones. I feel like he always looks pretty good in the boom bust duel too, just because he's always projected for such low ownership at a relatively low price. So project for 1.4% ownership with a 4% boom probability. It's not something that I'm going to be like going out of my way to get a ton of, but I always like the idea of Mac Jones, and we can hope for Jacoby Myers to finally score a touchdown.
Yeah. Every week, my hot take is Jacoby Myers scores a touchdown. He's getting closer. He's caught a couple of 2-point conversions over the last couple of weeks, which kind of like that should count for something, right? It's not like you're more likely to score a 2-point conversion from the 3-yard line than you'll actually catch a touchdown from the 3-yard line. So he's getting closer. It's coming. He also had that one, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago that got called back, which, in hindsight, I look back, I was like, well, I would have made a lot of money that week had that counted as a touchdown. But that aside, Jacoby Myers, hot take again this week. Jacoby Myers scores a touchdown. So I'm gonna ride. Eventually, it's gonna be right, and then I could victory lap it. If you call for a Jacoby Myers touchdown every week for 2 years, gonna hit on it eventually. But
just delete all the old tweets. Keep the one.
No, I don't do that either. I'm not gonna go back and do it. We just victory lap hard when Jacoby Myers actually scores the touchdown. Guys, do us a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you like this video, Jacoby Myers becomes 10% more likely to score a touchdown. Those are just the basic fundamentals of math. So like this video, give a nice boost to Jacoby Myers. Subscribe to the YouTube channel because we have a lot of content coming up today covering a whole bunch of sports. We've got MMA live before lock for one of my favorite UFC cards of the year, Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 2. That should be a great card tonight. So we've got Jason and Pete the Heat breaking that down later. We also got the NBA Deeper Dive and NBA Live before lock today. So lots of sports covered. So subscribe me knowing all of that is going to be going live. All right, let's move over to the running back position. And I just want to start by talking about the pay-up option on the slate that everybody's getting to on DK. Austin Eckler, he's at 7,900. FanDuel, he's at 9,000, so he's a little bit less popular. And also he's less of a play on FanDuel in general anyway, because only a half-point PPR and a lot of those points come via pass catching. But I want to ask you, how much of a priority is Austin Eckler for you as a pay-up option on DK?
He's not a huge priority for me. I'm probably going to be a little bit under the field if he does come in over 23% ownership as we have projected right now, just because he doesn't look great in the boom bust tool. As I said, 23% ownership, but 13.6% boom probability, 16.7% optimal probability. But again, 16.7% optimal probability is not a low number. So he's not somebody that I want a full fade. I'll probably come in right around that number, 16, 17% would be my expectation right now. Obviously, a lot can change between now and lock. But he's also $100 cheaper than Christian McCaffrey. So for me, if McCaffrey is active, I'm going to be taking some shots there. He's only projected for 5% ownership. We don't really know if he's going to have a full role, but I'm willing to take some shots when Christian McCaffrey is 8,000. I feel like that's cheaper than he's been the past 2 years. So I'm going to take some shots there. How about you?
Yeah, so here's where we have to look for Christian McCaffrey. If Ian Rappaport tweets on Sunday morning that Christian McCaffrey is only going to play a partial workload, expect like 40 carries from him. Yep. That's always been the telltale. Ian Rappaport, he's done that less this year. I don't know if you've noticed, or maybe I just pay attention to it less. But in previous years, he's been really heavy on predicting workloads. And I talked to the offensive coordinator, which he never does. He just bullshits it and makes it up. And then he's wrong all the time. So maybe that's one of the reasons he's done it less this year. But that was one where last year with Christian McCaffrey, we saw McCaffrey coming back from an injury. I'm going to pull up his exact workload numbers from that game. And I remember that morning, there was some ownership expected to go to McCaffrey. And then Rappaport tweeted that McCaffrey's expected only to get a limited workload. They're going to try to ease him into the game. And that was week 9 against the Chiefs. The final stat line for Christian McCaffrey in that game, and by the way, he ended up getting hurt, didn't play the rest of the season after that. He had 18 carries for 69 yards and 10 catches for 82 yards. So we had a guy supposedly on a workload limit who got 28 touches in the game. So if he's going to remain fairly low owned and we're for a little bit ambiguous about what his workload is going to be, I like getting overweight to the field on Christian McCaffrey. He's very, very difficult to project. So I don't know what he's ultimately going to look like in some of the tools. But I think, once again, some of that variance is something that I think we want to try to capture in tournaments. And Christian McCaffrey playing him in 10 to 15% of lineups is, pretty sensible to me. Is that kind of something you had in mind as well?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. Ian Rappaport, he burned me at least 3 or 4 times last year. So I guess shame on me. But maybe this year we just haven't been reading his stuff because he burned us too much last year. But yeah, I definitely like the idea of being overweight on Christian McCaffrey. And then Alvin Kamara, I think I'll be right with the field. He's projected for 12% ownership with a 10% boom probability, 13.1% optimal probability against an exploitable Falcons defense. It's a little bit of a tough situation to read because we have Taysom Hill back. Trevor Siemian is the quarterback. We don't really know how he's going to target McCaffrey, but he's a good enough player and cheap enough price tag that I'm willing to take shots on Kamara against the Falcons.
All right, now let's talk about my overall favorite running back option right now on DraftKings, and that is going to be Ezekiel Elliott. I also like him a whole bunch on FanDuel, but DraftKings in particular is one of the most positively leveraged plays on the slate. It's just too cheap of a price point for him at 7,000, and as much as we all go on Twitter and like to make fun of Ezekiel Elliott and talk about Tony Pollard and running backs don't matter, and that Pollard's been better for a lot of time from an efficiency standpoint over the last couple of years. Zeke played a pretty substantial role this year, and that's only gotten solidified as the year's gone on. He's also got Dak Prescott at quarterback now, so the Cowboys' offense has been better. The last 4 games, 20, 21, 17, 16 targets for Ezekiel, carries, not targets, carries for Ezekiel Elliott, but then targets in the last couple of games, 9 targets and 6 targets. So we've got a guy playing a big workload right now in Ezekiel Elliott. He looks massively under-owned, so he is actually currently my most rostered running back on both FanDuel and DraftKings, actually, in my builds. Do you think you're going to be getting to Ezekiel Elliott a bunch as well?
I do. And I'm one of the people who keeps waiting for Tony Pollard to break out, to get more work, take him in all my best ball. But every time I watch the Cowboys, I'm like, man, Zeke is actually a good running back. I mean, I think that we make fun of him too much, and we expect Pollard to take over prematurely, because Zeke is actually a talented running back. And like you said, 7,000, just too cheap in a game where they're 10-point favorites. They're going to put up a lot of points. He's only projected for 17.3% ownership, but an 18.4% boom probability and a 23.3% optimal lineup probability is huge. So I like the idea of taking some shots on Zeke. I might still take 1 or 2 shots on Tony, maybe more than 1 or 2, maybe 5 shots on Tony Pollard, just because I still think that he's an electric enough running back that it doesn't take many carries for him to bust one off. He hasn't really done it yet this year, as far as I can recall, but I'll probably take, just because he's 2.1% projected ownership, but 3.1% optimal lineup probability is good enough for me to say, hey, yeah, I'll take a few shots on Pollard where I don't have Zeke.
I think he played a pretty substantial role in the passing game in week 1. And then week 2, I think it was, it was week 2, Tony Pollard ended up rushing for over 100 yards against the Chargers. And that was when a lot of people, including myself, said, hey, we're finally getting rid of this Zeke guy. It's Tony Pollard time in Dallas. And it has just not been the case since then. But yeah, week 2, over 100 rushing yards for Tony Pollard. It looked like he was be cutting into Ezekiel Elliott's role, but has not been the case, especially not over the last couple of weeks. So Zeke's role looks pretty firmly entrenched to me. Let's move into the mid-range of some of these running backs, because there are a bunch of guys that do look pretty favorable here, where you're looking at people like backs like Devontae Booker, Myles Gaskin, Eli Mitchell is picking up a bunch of ownership. When we're getting into that, like mid 6K, 7K range, what is it that stands out to you?
Yeah, so Devontae Booker really stands out in the tools. He just has such a great opportunity. They just feed him the rock a lot. It's only projected for 7.9% ownership, but a 9.8% boom probability, 14% optimal lineup probability is pretty huge. So I really like Devontae Booker against the Raiders at only 5,900. Myles Gaskin, I don't really like as much. He just looks like he's going to be overowned. I understand the play against the Texans. I want to target running backs against the Texans too, but he's projected for 15.4% ownership with only an 8.5% boom probability and a 12.5% optimal lineup probability. So I would expect to come under the field on Myles Gaskin, maybe somewhere in the 10% range, give or take a few percentage points. And instead, here's another one where I might take a few shots on Salvon Ahmed. At only 4,000, not a ton, but he's only projected for 1.4% ownership with a 2.4% optimal lineup probability. And they haven't been that consistent with their usage of running backs this year. So it wouldn't shock me to see Salvon Ahmed get a few more opportunities than usual against the Texans, and he's only 4,000. So I don't hate taking some shots there. Who's standing out to you among the mid-range guys?
For me, it's primarily right now Devontae Booker and Eli Mitchell on DraftKings at 5,800. I also like Eli Mitchell even at the more elevated price point of $7,100 on FanDuel. I've still been getting to him there. Cordarrelle Patterson's another one that's kind of interesting to me. I feel like we've been projecting him a little bit too low for basically the entire season. And I mean, you go back to like week 2 where there was, I don't know how many weeks in a row where boom bust when a lot of our projections like, who's the running back to roster in Atlanta? Mike Davis. And I got to a certain point where I was like, well, I'm not playing Mike Davis anymore. I feel like we've been a little bit too high on him. And as a result, I also think we've been a little bit too low on Cordarrelle Patterson. And when you also consider that Cordarrelle Patterson, now there's no more Calvin Ridley for the foreseeable future for Atlanta. Who knows if he even plays again this season with some of the issues that he's having. I think Cordarrelle Patterson also stands to gain a lot in the passing game. So, I know that he does look a little bit negatively leveraged, but he's 6,300, and I'm a little bit higher on him than what some of the data is on the site. So I think he's somebody that could be going a little bit underlooked with the struggles of the Atlanta offense and Ridley missing.
Yeah, I agree. He's not somebody that I have been targeting because he doesn't look great in the tools, but he does make sense. I agree with you there. Because he's only 6,300, I don't love the matchup against the Saints, of course, but he's a good enough player, or he has been this year. He's been a good enough player that he can do it against any defense if they're targeting him. He's only 6,300. So yeah, I like the idea of playing a little bit as well of Cordarrelle Patterson. I did want to mention, so I'm curious what you think about Aaron Jones. So without Aaron Rodgers there, it's hard to kind of get a read on what they're going to do. Are they just going to run the ball more against the Chiefs? And if they do, I would think he would have some success against the Chiefs' terrible defense. But I just don't know. I'm going to have some Aaron Jones, I think. What do you think? Are you going to be playing Aaron Jones?
I do not have. Well, I'm not going to say knock him. I have him in 1% of the initial builds of my lineups, and he's not a priority for me. And it's for a couple of reasons. It's number one, Aaron Rodgers being out. That's just going to limit the Chiefs off the Packers offense as a whole. But then number two, also, there's just been games as of late where they go to AJ Dillon a lot at running back. So there's this thing where is the offense going to be inefficient without Aaron Rodgers? But then number two, are they just going to potentially go to AJ Dillon in some of these spots? You know, you look at the last couple of games, 15 carries for Aaron Jones and 6 carries. And then you look at AJ Dillon's workload the last 2 games, 16 carries and 3 carries. You know, I think this is kind of close to a split backfield. Sometimes it's Dillon, sometimes it's Jones. So that's something that also really gives me a little bit of pause. That and he's just overpriced because the pricing hasn't corrected for Aaron Rodgers being out.
Yeah, I had meant to look up AJ Dillon, and then you brought him up, and I had forgot. So I just looked it up now. 4,600. I was hoping that he'd be the min, and I'd be able to take some shots on AJ Dillon, but he's projected for 1.4% ownership. So, yeah, I think that's a good take. I'm still going to take some shots just because there's the possibility that they just know that Jordan Love can't do it, and they'll give him plenty of opportunities. And the Chiefs defense, maybe they'll be focused on stopping the run and making Jordan Love throw, but we don't really know that for sure. And we don't really know if they're capable of stopping the run anyway. So I'll take some shots on Aaron Jones, but I think your reasoning is good. I don't want to get too crazy with Aaron Jones despite the positive matchup.
Yeah, and this actually might be somebody to like for kind of similar reasons to Aaron Jones, but a little bit different of a situation. That's Josh Jacobs finally looking healthy for the Raiders. Now you consider that Henry Ruggs is out of the picture, and it's just a thin receiving core. I do wonder if we start to see them prioritize run the ball a little bit more. Also, we haven't seen a whole lot of this team without John Gruden at coach. Who knows what that means in terms of a change of philosophy? So I think it's potentially we see an uptick in role for Josh Jacobs. He's fairly inexpensive on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He's $7,200 on FanDuel, $6,200 on DK. So Josh Jacobs is somebody else who I think for a lot of the same reasons that you like Aaron Jones, although not exactly the same, a potential more of a priority on the running game for the Raiders has me getting to Josh Jacobs fairly overweight to the field.
Yeah, and he looks good in the tools. I mean, he's projected for under 10% ownership, but a 10.6% boom probability, 12.6% optimal lineup probability. 6,200 is not too hefty of a price tag. So I agree with you. I would expect to be over the field on Josh Jacobs. While we're talking about these mid-range guys, I feel like we didn't talk about Nick Chubb, but I think Nick Chubb looks pretty good against the Bengals. Only projected for 8.3% ownership, but 13.3% optimal lineup probability. So I'll be taking some shots on Nick Chubb. And then Damian Harris, I also want to bring up just because he's only projected for 3.6% ownership. He's not a play that I love, but 8.5% optimal lineup probability at 3.6% ownership looks pretty good for Damian Harris. And I think I think we've talked about basically every running back that I really wanted to talk about. How about you? Anybody else?
Those were all the pertinent ones for me. That pretty much sums up in the player play build. We've hit on everybody that I have more than like 5% of at this point. So believe we've encompassed that pretty well. And if you guys want access to all of the tools that Neil and I are talking about that we use to build our lineups, you can get access to all of the tools we have for every sport out there, signing up for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. Also, if you're a new user to Awesemo Plus, sign up using the promo code NFL Strategy Show, and that gets you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And if you're only looking to play NFL DFS, we do have NFL Plus weekly packages starting for as low as $3.95. Stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo Plus today. So let's head on over to these wideouts now, Neil. And I'm going to start with kind of a weird place, and that's with the Buffalo Bills, mostly because I don't know what to make of the Cole Beasley situation. He's somebody who right now looks way too cheap on both FanDuel and DraftKings. The initial builds I was getting to a lot of Cole Beasley, but I'm not sure he plays anymore. He didn't practice towards the tail end of the week. He's also listed as questionable. If he is out, what do you think the ramifications are? And if he's in, are you going to want to roster him?
If he's in, I will want to roster him just based on the data that we have projected for 10% ownership, but a 15.8% boom probability. Of course, that could change once it becomes clear that he's in. So I'll be watching these numbers. Kind of depends on where his ownership comes in at. But if it remains around 10% and he's got a 15.8% boom probability, I would expect to have some Cole Beasley in my lineups for sure. If he's out, I mean, I already like Stephon Diggs and love Emmanuel Sanders. So if he's out, I'll just probably be playing even more of them. Stephon Diggs currently projected for 13.3% ownership and 14.8% optimal probability. So I would want to be over that 15%. I'd be over the 15% number on Diggs. And then Emmanuel Sanders, 4.6% projected ownership, but an 8.7% optimal lineup probability, 9.5% boom score. So I'd probably be over 10% on Emmanuel Sanders if Beasley is out, maybe even if Beasley's in. And then, of course, I think you'd have to consider Gabe Davis, just because with Beasley out, I mean, they spread the ball around. I'm sure Gabe Davis would have more opportunities. I didn't check what his price is.
He is 5,000 on FanDuel and 3,500 on DraftKings. I know because I was just about to bring him up because I was going to say Gabriel Davis becomes one of my, if not my favorite value play on the slate at 3,500 if Beasley doesn't play. And another thing to consider, that would make it easier to stack the Bills, making double stacks of Davis with Allen and Sanders or Diggs, just because that opens up so much salary savings with a 3,500 Gabriel Davis.
Yeah, that would be a great play. And I agree on all of that. I'd probably be getting to more Josh Allen. It's like we've talked about before. You'd think that the quarterback gets worse with one of his receivers being out, but in a way he just becomes more concentrated. You kind of know how to do the stack. So I would probably get to a little bit more Josh Allen in that scenario. But yeah, I like whoever the three are that are in and projected to get the most snaps are the three that I'm going to like. I'm going to play all of them for the Bills.
All right. And then the other mid-range wide receiver, which, I mean, we've talked about some of these guys kind of in passing, but haven't really gone into detail with them. Jarvis Landry benefiting from the absence of Odell Beckham, one of my favorite value plays on the slate on wide receiver, both FanDuel and DraftKings. Same goes for Hunter Renfrow, who we have to look at who on the Raiders stands to benefit the most from Henry Ruggs not being from Ruggs not being in the picture. It's going to be Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, to me, both see an uptick in targets. Any issue with either of those guys, you can be on board with me. Landry, Renfrow, both core plays for me as of now.
Yeah, so right now I'm very much on board with you. We're going to have to watch the ownership because it wouldn't surprise me if they both shoot up a bit. But currently, yeah, I mean, they look amazing. Jarvis Landry only projected for 10% ownership, but a 17.5% boom probability, 16.2% optimal lineup probability. I really like that. I'm surprised that none of the cheaper wide receivers for the Browns really looked that great on our tools. I thought maybe Rashad Higgins or Donovan Peoples-Jones would look really good. They don't look that great, but they're cheap enough. I'll probably take a few shots on both of those guys, Higgins and Peoples-Jones. But for the most part, yeah, Jarvis Landry, he's the guy we're going to want, assuming that his ownership doesn't get up to like 30%. We're going to want to have a lot of Jarvis Landry. And then, yeah, Hunter Renfrow looks incredible in the tools right now. Only projected for 11.9% ownership, but 25% boom probability. That is huge. I mean, that's massive. And a 17.2% optimal lineup probability. He's only 4,800. He presumably should be getting more opportunity now that Ruggs isn't on the team. So I really like Renfrow as well. And again, as far as the cheaper guys on the Raiders, I always like to look at them, in groups, look at the receivers in groups. Bryan Edwards looks okay. I'll probably be over the field. He's only projected for 4.4% ownership, 4.6% boom probability, 7.5% optimal lineup probability. And as we know, he's the next Megatron. That's what they were saying all summer. So yeah. we know Bryan Edwards is ready to break out. And then Zay Jones, only 3,000, projected for 2.4% ownership, but a 3.7% optimal lineup probability. I might get to 5% Zay Jones or so. So yeah, I like all those guys. How are you feeling about the cheaper guys on these teams?
Here's in theory, I would like them a lot, but you kind of look at the context of this slate, right? And there are so many mid-ish range wide receivers to get to, I think, that make for really good plays in both FanDuel and DraftKings. Jacoby Myers, like I said, I'm predicting a touchdown from him again this week. We're going to be right eventually on that. I like Jacoby Myers. He's cheap. Hunter Renfrow is cheap. Jarvis Landry is cheap. And you just get to a point where it's like, okay, do I really need to roster these wide receivers at 38, 3,900, 4,100 when I could pay $1,000 more on a slate where we don't have that many guys to pay up for, and we can get to a Jarvis Landry, Hunter Renfrow, who just projects so well. So in theory, I think these guys would make for good plays on most slates. I just don't know how practical or necessary it is for this particular slate.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me.
And then another thing I want to ask you about is pay up options at wide receiver. We touched on Stephon Diggs and the potential for him to have a big game, especially if Cole Beasley is going to be being out. But if Cole Beasley is out, but some of the other wide receivers, we don't have Cooper Kupp to pay up for on the slate. He's basically been like an automatic 20 to 30 fantasy points every game. I don't think Devontae Adams is all that appealing with Jordan Love at quarterback instead of Aaron Rodgers. And with all of these cheap guys to get to, I'm not really paying up for wide receiver that much this week. So it's not to say that guys like Deebo Samuel or Tyreek Hill are bad plays or Justin Jefferson, But I'm really preferring to get to like 20 to 30% of some of these cheaper guys that we mentioned, pay up a little bit at running back. But are you getting to any of the high-end wide receivers or any individual ones more than others?
Yeah, it's funny. There's no really expensive guys that we really want to pay up for at any position. I mean, at running back, the most expensive guy is 8,200. That's a lot less than we usually can. So maybe I'll end up getting, so I haven't done my builds yet, but I might get to some of these guys just because, you need to spend your salary somewhere and they might end up projecting well. But yeah, none of them at face value are guys that I really want to target. Devonta Adams with Jordan Love at quarterback is not somebody I really want to play. Tyreek Hill, I don't know. I'll have some Tyreek Hill. He's one of those guys that I never get right. So I think I'm biased against Tyreek Hill because I never get him right. I'm always under the field when he goes off, and then I go over the field and he does. So I'm probably going to try to be right with the field on Tyreek Hill. And he's projected for 21% ownership. I might be just a little bit below that, maybe 16 or 17%, just because he's 17.2% optimal lineup probability. So I might have a little bit under the field on Tyreek Hill. I do like Diggs a lot. We talked about Diggs, 7,700. I'll probably get over the field on Diggs. So he's one of the few pay up options that I will be over the field on. And then Jamar Chase, I would again expect to be maybe slightly over the field on his 10% projected ownership, but not going out of my way to get way over the field on him. Justin Jefferson, kind of the same story. I'll be over the field. If he ends up at 6.7% ownership, I'll definitely be over the field on Justin Jefferson, especially because I'm going to be playing so much Lamar Jackson. But I don't think I'm not going to be playing 25%, I don't think, but I'll be probably over the 6.7%. So yeah, I agree with you. There's no real like slam dunk Cooper Kupp types on the slate in great matchups in the pay up option. So yeah, there's nobody that I'm going to be getting a ton of. And I agree with you. The mid range is probably where most of my ownership is going to be.
One other guy in the mid range that we've not yet talked about yet that I want to add into the mix is going to be Kadarius Toney, and he's been so up and down this year. We talk about trying to capture some of this variance in tournaments where, I'm less concerned about the downside because realistically, a mediocre result is just the same as a bad result more often than not in tournaments because we need to produce a lot of upside. And Kadarius Toney, there's no Sterling Shepard for the Giants this week, and it was a little bit of a disappointing game, but more than a little bit disappointing for Kadarius Toney against the Chiefs. But he also didn't play a whole lot of snaps in the first half of that game, so I think the Giants are just being a little bit cautious with his overall health coming back from an ankle injury. But the last time we saw him fully healthy in the game that Sterling Shepard did not play in, Kadarius Toney against the Dallas Cowboys, 10 receptions on 13 targets for 189 yards. Now, do I think that's the most likely outcome? No, but it shows the kind of upside that Toney has. So he's somebody at lower ownership that I also really like adding into the mix with the likes of Hunter Renfrow and Jarvis Landry added earlier. So what are you going to do with the young and highly volatile Kadarius Toney?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of guy we want to play, right? And he looks good in the tools too. So he's only projected for 8.6% ownership, but 10% boom probability, 11.7% optimal lineup probability at only 5,200. I really like the play. I just think we don't really know what to expect. But like you said, he had that one big game. And then I think it was the next game where he was targeted like 3 times in the first drive. I think he might have had 3 catches in the first drive and then got hurt. So they clearly want to use him. And I like your thought that maybe they were just kind of slowly bringing him into the game. Maybe we can expect a little bit more workload this game. And I like Daniel Jones. So I think Kadarius Toney is kind of a natural pair in with Daniel Jones. So I would expect to be over the field on Kadarius Toney as well.
Yeah, so it was that game against the Rams, and that's actually a good point because I kind of forgot about the narrative to that. Kadarius Toney played something like 8 snaps, and it was the first Giants drive of the game. On those limited snaps he played, he was targeted 3 times, like you said, 3 catches for 36 yards. He appeared well on his way to a massive fantasy game that day. Rolls the ankle, gets hurt, and that's then caused him to miss a game. He comes back, limited workload. So as long as we don't hear anything about Kadarius Toney being limited, I think this is a spot where he has a pretty substantial amount of upside. Are there any other wideouts here that are going to be important or pivotal plays for you that we've not hit on yet?
Yeah, so one I want to talk about is Brandon Aiyuk, just because of Deebo Samuel's status. We don't know, but the news yesterday is that Deebo Samuel's calf is worse than it was last week. So Brandon Aiyuk has been terrible this year, but coming into the year, we thought he was going to be one of the best young receivers in the game. He was so talented, looked so great last year, and now he's down to 4,100. If Deebo Samuel is out, I'm going to want to play some Brandon Aiyuk at 4,100 just because I would assume that he's going to be the number 1 receiver. And if we don't know going into the noon games, I'm going to plan for Debo being out, and I'm going to plan on having Aiyuk in my lineups, and then I'll adjust. If Debo, if it comes out that Debo's fully healthy, feeling great, then maybe I'll lower my exposure to Brandon Aiyuk. But even if we just get word that Debo is playing, but we don't get any indication of how he's feeling exactly, I might still take more shots than the field on Brandon Aiyuk and just hope that Debo Samuel. I mean, I don't want to say I'm going to hope for an injury, but acknowledge that it's a possibility that he's going to get hurt in game, and then Brandon Aiyuk becomes the number one. So I like the idea of playing Brandon Aiyuk at 4,100. What do you think of that play?
So I'm actually going to use this as a talking point to transition us to tight end, because I like the logic there, except I'm going a little bit of a different direction with the same situation. That's going to be George Kittle at tight end, who is cheap and picking up no ownership this week, and he's expected to come back from his injury. George Kittle has said himself he's feeling a little bit rusty, but he's ready to get back on the field. He is 6,000 on FanDuel, picking up 4% projected ownership. On DraftKings at 5,200, projected for 2% ownership. Nobody's playing George Kittle. Obviously, there's risk involved coming off the injury, but I care more about the upside. This is somebody who coming into the year was consensus considered one of the top tight ends in football. And just because of some injury now, we're totally forgetting about him. I don't think that he should be that far removed from what he was in the past. So I agree with everything you said about Aiyuk, but I'm just flipping the name and changing it to George Kittle instead of Aiyuk.
Why not both? I'm going to be playing some George Kittle as well. I like the idea of George Kittle, 5,200. I mean, that's a pretty low price tag for a guy who coming into the year was the number 3 tight end, I think was the expectation, behind Kelsey and Waller, and he's way cheaper than those guys. So I will definitely be over the field. He's only projected for 1.8% ownership on DraftKings. I love that. Yeah, I'm going to be taking some shots on Kittle for sure. And the same logic applies. I'm not going to go over it all again with not knowing Debo's status. I just think Kittle may be the number 1 receiver there as well. So yes, I will be well over the field on George Kittle if he really does come in at under 2% ownership.
Yeah, and once again, it's going to be dependent a little bit on Debo Samuel's status, although I'm going to like to get a little bit of George Kittle, even if Samuel plays. But if Samuel is out, then I'm really going to like George Kittle. But my number 1 overall favorite tight end this week is going to be Darren Waller. He is $6,200 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we have Darren Waller priced at $6,800. Once again, there's additional target share to go in that Las Vegas Raiders offense without Ruggs in the picture. And I think we should assume a lot of it goes to Hunter Renfrow. A lot of it goes to Darren Waller. Neither of them are priced yet for the change in situation. So I really like this Raiders offense as a whole. And really, as we walk through this show and talk about them more, I think I have to get more interested in Derek Carr as a quarterback option, just because we talked about liking Josh Jacobs. We talked about liking Renfrow. We talked about liking Darren Waller. At some point, I'm going to have to play the quarterback with these guys as well. But Waller's my favorite overall tight end option on the slate. And once again, it's because of all the same reasons we liked Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah, I mean, Waller looks great in the tools. Like you said, larger target share than he has had, only projects for 11.1% ownership at 6,200 with a 20.2% boom probability and a 13.6% optimal lineup probability. I agree with you. Darren Waller looks great. I think the thing that's going to keep me from going like well over the field, and I think I'll be over the field on Waller, the thing that's keeping me from going well over the field is that Kyle Pitts actually looks great as well. With only projected for 6.2% ownership, but an 18.2% boom probability. I really like that, and 10% optimal lineup probability. So I really like Kyle Pitts, and he is a little bit cheaper than Darren Waller. So that'll dampen my Waller ownership a little bit, but I'm still going to get over the field on Waller. I'm just going to also be over the field on Pitts. It's a weird slate in that there are a lot of tight ends who look really great in the tools. So I think that sort of just dampens my ownership on all of them a little bit, because so many of them look good relative to their ownership. Do you think you're going to be condensed or a little bit more spread out? What's your plan this week?
It's funny. I usually go spread out at tight end, but it's because I hate all of the options. And like you said, it's the inverse. There's a lot of guys to like this week, so it ends up being the same result, but it's just by a completely different process. Where I agree with you. I think there's a reason to like George Kittle. Darren Waller's overall my favorite. Kyle Pitts, you just mentioned. There's no Calvin Ridley in the mix, and Pitts has been highly volatile this year, but once again, I think that's something that we generally want to take advantage of in tournaments. Just like the last 4 games for Kyle Pitts, he scored 9 DraftKings points, 29.9, 26.3, and 3.3. Production all over the map, but I think we should consider that there's likely to be extra targets coming his way with regularity with no Calvin Ridley in the picture. So I'm on board with you with Kyle Pitts as well. I want to ask you for your opinion on Travis Kelce, because we talked about Patrick Mahomes at the top of the show, and about how some of his struggles. And one thing I correlated to is I think that Travis Kelce just looks a step slower this year. And that's not to say that he's not somebody who can have big fantasy games, because he clearly can with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. But last year, he had over 20 fantasy points in almost every single game. This year, he has not had over 20 fantasy points since week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens. So maybe he's hiding an injury. Maybe it's something else going on, but we just do not generally see production this poor from Travis Kelce. Do you think he's potentially lost a step? And are you looking to pay up for him at tight end this week?
I think it's possible. I think it's more likely that Travis Kelce has lost a step than Patrick Mahomes, for sure, because he is a little bit older. I mean, we saw it with Zach Ertz. He was so great, and then the next year he just plummeted. Now he's rebounded a little bit. It wouldn't be that shocking if Travis Kelce has lost a step. And yeah, he didn't look great at all on Monday night. I mean, he looked pretty rough out there. But I'm not going to assume that he's dust at this point. I'm not going to play it like he's dust. I'm going to have some Travis Kelce. The thing that's going to keep me from getting well over the field again is all these other tight end options that I like. It's not because I'm, expecting that Travis Kelce is just dust at this point. It's just because there are cheaper guys that I like as much or better than Kelce in their matchup. So I think I'll be maybe over the field on 7.5% projected ownership, because 7,000 isn't prohibitive. I mean, that's not a huge price tag for Travis Kelce, but it's not something that I'm not going to be playing 25% Travis Kelce either. So I think I'll be over the field. Where do you think you're going to come in relative to the 7.5% projected ownership?
I'm going to be overweight to it, especially because we do have such low ownership going to Patrick Mahomes. And I said that I want to kind of try to prioritize getting some Chief stacks. And then I look at how I think that he's ultimately, with Travis Kelce and Chief stacks, going to fit into my lineup builds. And there's a lot of cheap wide receivers I like. So I know that somebody in the YouTube chat, Chronic Smith, had mentioned that Alex said in a video he made earlier in the week that he really likes cheap tight ends. The one thing I kind of differ with it for this week is there's so many cheap wide receivers to like now at this point, and cheap wide receivers that probably Alex didn't know about when he made that video earlier in the week. That, the Odell Beckham situation, that's new. The Ruggs situation, that's new. And it's just opened up all this value at wide receiver. Then you start to look, well, where am I going to pay up? And it kind of makes sense to be like, hey, I'm going to pay up a little bit for Travis Kelce, pay up for Darren Waller, maybe more so than I would in other weeks at tight end. So it just kind of naturally fits that my Patrick Mahomes stacks are going to be more with Kelce than with Tyreek Hill, just because there's so many wide receivers I like as well.
Yeah, I like that thought. I mean, this is just a slate where there's just no, like I said earlier, there's nobody you really love paying up for. So it's not really a stars and scrubsy slate. So I feel like we're going to get a lot more mid-range. And Travis Kelce, he's not that expensive. So yeah, I think that it's a slate where, in a vacuum, I agree that all of these cheap tight ends look great. But like you said, we didn't have all the news. Alex probably didn't know what we know now when he made that video. So he might not be quite as high on some of the cheap tight ends. Although, I mean, some of the cheap tight ends still look pretty great at their current projected ownership. We'll see if they change. Did you want to talk about some of those cheap guys? Or
I want to talk about one I don't like, and that is Tyler Conklin, who I'm confused by his ownership. He's been okay this year, and he's had a couple of good games in a row, but not spectacular games. He does remain really cheap. But the last couple of weeks, 10.7 fantasy points, 10.1, and once again has a price point in the low 3K range. But I still don't understand, why are people rostering him with double-digit ownership here when we have so many tight ends to get to? And also, by the way, if you guys want to check out these ownership projections, they're free to use over at awesemo.com for today. So that is our free content today. Go check that out and see some of the stuff we have up on the site. But are you on the same page with me with Tyler Conklin? Can you explain why he's become this popular?
I mean, maybe it's because people want to play Lamar and he's a natural cheap run back. So maybe that pushes his ownership a little bit. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm not planning on playing a lot of Tyler Conklin. He's one I hadn't even written on my sheet because there are so many other tight ends that I like better. Yeah, I'm not planning on getting to Tyler Conklin in any significant number. Maybe I'll have a couple of shares, but it wouldn't surprise me if I get 0 Tyler Conklin this week, given how much I like a lot of the other tight ends a lot more.
Yeah, and one of those ones who is going to stay. Alberto. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because that would go poorly. I've tried to do it before, and it's not a name that I've mastered yet. There's a lot of NBA names, the foreign names that I've gotten better at, like Şengün on the Houston Rockets. I've watched Turkish videos to try to pronounce his name. Alberto is just going to be Alberto for me, but he's somebody who rates out pretty well for us. And if you're looking for a pivot as a cheap tight end play, I would go from Conklin to Alberto. The reason being, both of them priced about the same, 3,000 for Conklin on DK, 2,600 for Alberto. Similar ownership also, but we have Alberto landing the optimal at 14.5% of the time compared to just 2.8% of the time for Tyler Conklin. So that's the pivot I like to make if we're going on the cheap end. Is that reasonable to you?
Yep, he looks great right now. I mean, it kind of depends on where his ownership comes in at. Currently on DraftKings, only projected for 8.5% ownership. So that's really low given the 21.8% boom probability on DraftKings. So currently where things stand, I would be well over the field on Alberto. I'm also not going to try to pronounce it. I think I tried maybe week 1 or 2 whenever he was relevant the last time, and I regretted it because I did not pronounce it correctly. So I'm not going to try either. But yeah, I'm going to be, if things stand as they are now, I'm probably going to be over the field on Albert O at only 2,600. And then another pivot I kind of like is Tommy Sweeney against the Jaguars, just because he's only 3,100, only projected for 3.5% ownership, but a 13.5% boom probability, 6.8% optimal lineup probability. So I think I'll get to some Tommy Sweeney. And then actually a third cheap tight end that I like is Jared Cook at 3,300 versus the Eagles. Only projected for 8% ownership, but a 12% boom probability, 9.6% optimal lineup probability. So there's just a lot of alternatives that I like better than Tyler Conklin. So I'm not going to force it in, even though I'll probably be watching that game. And usually I like to have the players that I'm watching. I'm not going to force it in this week.
Yeah, and one other thing to mention about Tommy Sweeney is, so there's a new show that I'm doing on Fridays with Gunbacker, where we look at the top stacks tool, then we go into Fantasy Crunch, we make some settings, and we run lineups with some of the most positively leveraged stacks. And when we were making Bills stacks on DraftKings yesterday, I did notice that we were getting to a lot of Tommy Sweeney popping up in double stacks with Stephon Diggs. So some of those lineups where we needed a little bit of value with Josh Allen and Steph Diggs, Sweeney was popping up at tight end in those lineups. So let's jump over to the DSTs now. And we kind of have an interesting talking point here, just because it's very rare that we see a defense that is this popular. And on both DraftKings and FanDuel, the Kansas City Chiefs, the chalk of the slate, $2,300 on DK. On FanDuel, the price point is $3,300, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, $3,300. So we got 10% ownership going to them on FanDuel, which is, pretty substantial for defense, but over 20% on DraftKings. What do you make of them against Jordan Love when we don't know what we're going to be getting out of Love? We know the Chiefs defense has sucked this year, but they're nearly min price against a quarterback with basically no experience.
I mean, if they were coming in at 4% ownership, I would love them against Jordan Love. They were one of the defenses that I was planning on talking about. And then I looked at the tool and I was like, man, 22% projected ownership. They're a bad defense. So doesn't matter how cheap they are. If they don't put up any points, they're probably not going to be optimal. So I don't love the Chiefs in this spot, given the ownership. I mean, again, it could work out 2,300 against Jordan Love. They could get a pick six, and that would be all they need at 2,300. But I'm going to take my chances elsewhere, just given the 22% ownership and only 10.5% boom probability, 11.7% optimal lineup probability. I'd rather get under the field for sure if they're going to get 22% ownership. How about you?
Yeah, I think. It's tough because I do like to save money at defense. So I'm trying to find out, just looking where I want to go for other cheaper defenses if I'm not going to be playing them. And, the other ones here, it's like, do I really want to roster the Browns defense against the Bengals? No, probably not really for me. Let's see, what else looks cheap and has potential. So the top boom scores right now for cheap defenses, it is the Browns at 2,500, but I don't know that I really love getting to that, especially because of how many pieces I like on offense on the other side. There's the Panthers defense at 2,600. Maybe it's a thing where just mix and match. Defense generally tends to be random anyway, and maybe there's a bunch of defense they'll just end up playing 5 to 8%. I'm going to be underweight to the field on the Chiefs. I just don't know how heavily underweight to the field.
Yeah. So I do like the Browns just because the Bengals have such a bad offensive line. I could see them getting some sacks. They're a pretty good defense. So I like the Browns at 2,500 against the Bengals. I would expect to be over the field on them, just given how they look in the tool too. I mean, 3.1% projected ownership on DraftKings, 8.6% boom probability, 5.5% optimal lineup probability. And I mentioned earlier, I really like the 49ers, and just assuming that Kyler's out, I hope the news doesn't come out before lock, so everybody locks in the Chiefs defense, and then I'm going to be well over the field on the Niners defense. So I'm just going to plan on being well over the field on the Niners in this spot.
All right. So any other defense takes? If not, we could hit on our top stacks of the weeks, and then we'll get on out of here.
No other defenses for me. I think those are the ones that I wanted to talk about.
All right. So in terms of favorite stacks this week, I'm going to go with the contrarian stack. I'm going to say Joe Burrow to T. Higgins with Jarvis Landry as a run back on the other side. I really, really like Landry this week, and I don't really like much of the Browns offense, maybe a little bit of Nick Chubb around him. So I prefer bringing it back with the Bengals side of the game than Baker Mayfield himself. So give me Joe Burrow with T. Higgins, and then we can even double stack with either Jamar Chase or Tyler Boyd, Jarvis Landry on the other side. That is something I really like getting overweight to the field on for large field tournaments or single entry. Neil, if you were building one tournament lineup this week, what would be your stack choice?
So I feel like I always go contrarian here, and I've had mixed results. I'm not going to go contrarian today. I'm going to go Josh Allen. I like Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs and Emmanuel Sanders. They're the two that we know are going to play. I mean, you can mix in Beasley or Gabe Davis, depending on who's going to be the third starter. But yeah, I really like Josh Allen with Diggs and Sanders.
All right, that is going to do it for us, guys. If you've not done so already, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We still got MMA content coming up today. We've got NBA Deeper Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. So do us a favor, check all that out as well.